One of the benefits I have of teaching at Houston Baptist University is I get to meet some really sharp students. And so previously, I've had on and interviewed a girl named Charlotte Thomason and interviewed her on her near death experience. She died in childbirth. She had been raped by her dad. She got pregnant as a result, gave birth at age 12. She died in childbirth. So did her child. And she went to heaven. She met Jesus, who was holding her baby, but she didn't know that it was her baby because she wasn't aware that the baby had died as well. Anyway, she described this in an interview we had on here, and she has since written a book that has been published. Another sharp student I've had who I supervised his master's thesis was Josh Pelletier, and he did his master's thesis on some prolegomena related to the Gospel of Mark. He did research on where critical scholars since 1965 stand on some issues related to Mark, such as when was Mark written, who was the author, and who is the author's primary source? Was it Peter, as the early church tradition states? Well, I had another sharp student. His name is Chris Snyder, and I was fortunate, blessed to be able to supervise his master's thesis. Did a very large one on the topic was on the post-resurrection appearances of Jesus outside the New Testament, and it turned out to be really good. Chris was a great student. He required very little supervision. I love those kind of students. Very little supervision, very self-motivated, and just did a fantastic master's thesis. And he's going to be going on for his PhD and building upon the research he did on that master's thesis. Chris, welcome. It's great to see you again, brother.
Great. Thanks for having me, Dr. Locana. Thrilled to be here.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, as you and I both know, the New Testament preserves the New Testament literature is our very best source pertaining to the resurrection appearances of Jesus. But you have studied some resurrection appearances that appear in literature outside of the New Testament. Tell us why is this important? What significance does this hold?
Well, for the extra biblical post resurrection appearances of Jesus, it's important to look at him for the material that it provides and the perception and the understanding that we can have. So, if we look at it this way, there was a movement triggered in the early first century in Jerusalem that surrounds Jesus. So, Jesus was known as being a miracle worker, an exorcist. He was known for being a great teacher. But he was also known to have been crucified on a Roman cross, and then he was also believed to have been witnessed rising from the dead, or not actually rising from the dead. He is understood to have been witnessed after his crucifixion. So it's interesting when you look at these things and you look at what the New Testament has to say about Jesus. What a lot of people don't know is that extra biblical literature talks about Jesus quite a bit. So, if Christianity is contingent on the resurrection or on his rising from the dead, as Paul claims in 1 Corinthians 15, then it seems to me that his appearances are vital to us. If these are the proofs that Christianity is true, then we should be looking into these appearances. Well, as I mentioned, a lot of people aren't aware that there's appearances listed outside the New Testament. So I think we really need to give these some attention, look at them. What can we learn
Let
from
me
them?
just chime in here for a moment and ask you
Sure.
something. You're mentioning this extra biblical literature. Are you referring to non-Christian literature, or exactly what are you referring to?
Yeah, so most of my content is Christian, in parentheses here. It's, or not parentheses, but uh, it's Christian in the sense that it was written by people that were following Christ. Now, I kind of throw this up in the air a little bit because a lot of this information was classified as being heretical. So whether it's Christian or not, I mean that's still hanging out there a little bit. And matter of fact, some of my future research is working on some of those things. But the majority of the content is Christian based. That's
So
what I
in other
went after
words,
direct.
you're not saying you're not talking about secular literature written like Josephus or
Oh
Tacitus or
no.
people like that. This would be like Gnostic and
Yes.
non-orthodox
Yes.
Christian writings, things
Apostolic
like that.
Fathers, ante-Nicene Fathers,
Okay.
that kind of material. Yes.
The Apostolic Fathers. Okay, well, they'd be Orthodox. Yeah, okay, gotcha. So it could be Orthodox, could be Gnostic, could be heretical, but it's typically Christian is what you're talking about, right? Not
Yeah.
not
Yes. Yes.
non-Christian, non-religious.
Right. As of right now, my focus is on the Christian literature itself. Not to say that the other stuff won't come into play at some point, but for my thesis, for the sake of brevity, I had to keep it limited down.
Okay. So go
Yeah.
ahead. You were so
Yeah. So
give us a summary of your thesis topic then.
Yeah, so my thesis, this is how I approached it. I initially come up with a question. Well, you assisted me with coming up with a very specific question to answer regarding extra biblical post crucifixion appearances of Jesus in the early church. Well, when I set out to address that question for my thesis, I found that I had a problem. There really isn't much out there as far as sources that document or address the post crucifixion appearances of Jesus as a focal point. I'm not saying that there's not writings out there and current sources that address them. I'm just saying not as a focal point, or there's at least not very many of them. There's certainly no one that puts all this information and compiles it into one source, in an exhaustive sense anyway. So, uh, obviously that threw a wrench into what I was trying to accomplish when I can't find information on the subject I'm trying to pursue. So that led me to having to track down the information for myself. So I started off with the Apostolic Fathers, and I read down through all of that information, looking for any post crucifixion appearances of Jesus. And then I moved on to the ante Nicene Fathers, searched through all that material. I mean, I read all of them myself. Nag Hammadi Library, going on down through, and there was just a ton of information. Matter of fact, it took me about a year and a half to find the information and read through it all. I mean, it's just a massive, massive amount of works. I ended up with about 100, over 150 different sources of information that I had to read myself. And those sources were made up of books, fragments, manuscripts, small pieces of parchment, everything that I could find within about 170 years of the crucifixion date. So when I say the crucifixion date, I'm talking scholars will give you between 30 to 35 AD as a date for the crucifixion. They won't give you any problem with that at all. And then provided a cutoff date of about 200 AD. So every Christian work I could find in that time period, I read and scoured for appearances of Jesus post-crucifixion. So after I found all these appearances and documented
By the
them,
way, let me just throw something in here before you continue. One thing I really appreciated about you, and I encouraged you to take your time with this. And, a lot of students, I wouldn't say in our MA program in Christian apologetics, but a lot of students, especially in undergrad, are just in it to get the degree. You just plow through this thing and you just, it's just grunt work to finish your bachelor's degree because you need a degree. So you're not in it. Some people are in it not so much to learn, but just to get that degree, that card that you have in your wallet says, I've got a college degree. By the time you get to grad school, at least what I found, most of the grad students that I teach, they're there because they want to be and want to learn. It's not just to get a master's degree to say they have a master's degree. And Chris, where I applaud you is you're one of those students that, we talked and it's like, okay, you weren't in any rush to finish this. Like you just said a moment ago, it took you a year and a half of reading, of just going through this literature. Some people do their whole entire master's thesis. They do the research and the writing, they get it done within a single semester. It took you a year and a half just to get the reading done. And so I really appreciated that. You did quality work. and trying to leave no stone unturned. And so that's wonderful.
Yeah, it was a massive project, to be honest. It took a while. I'll be honest with you. Some of this reading was really, really dry, but I had to plow through it to, find what I was looking for, since it really wasn't out there. And I do need to clarify. There are some works out there. There were some authors that mention some of these appearances, but usually it's when they were addressing problem or issues with like the Gospels themselves, or Gospels outside the New Testament Gospels, not the canonical stuff. They're addressing the Gospel of Peter and some of the stuff that's questionable. They'll bring up, hey, here's an appearance of Jesus, but nothing with the focal point of actually examining the post-crucifixion Jesus himself or the appearances and the information surrounding it. So, when I'm going through my thesis, I cataloged all this information, examined it, summarized it, put it together, and I learned quite a bit from that itself. And then that's a catalyst into my next project, my doctoral dissertation, where I will expand upon that research.
Yeah, that's going to be important work. What's really nice too is you've already got a head start on your PhD now, because you've done a
Yes.
whole lot of the reading. So even though it took you longer to get your master's, it's still going to pay off and shorten the time it takes you to do your dissertation. So what you're saying is, you looked at not the non-Christian, secular non-Christian sources, but you looked at the so-called Christian, extra biblical Christian sources, all of them outside the New Testament and up until around the year 200. So assuming the entire New Testament literature was finished around the year 100, then you're looking at all the Christian literature, so-called Christian literature written in the second century, another 100 years worth, all that literature outside the New Testament. That's pretty cool stuff. Really cool stuff. So what other criteria? Do you use any other criteria for your material?
Yes, actually, I did. In addition to the dating, which I mentioned, it had to be between 35 to 200. And I need to clarify this as well. When I looked at some of this material, as you know, some of this extra biblical literature, there's not really consensus on the dating. It does get very, very complicated. So a lot of this material that I included in my research, I had to look at arguments from scholars for the earliest it could have been written, and then I look at arguments for the latest it could have been written. So when I'm applying these sources to my research, I took, for primary consideration, I looked at the earliest it could have been written. So if there's good scholarly arguments that a piece of literature was written, between 30 to 200, it made the cut. So, some of these sources that I look at, someone might argue, well, hey, that was written after 200. True, that may be the case on some of these, but there are scholars out there that at some point argued that it did fit within my time frame. So that's important to mention. But then in addition to that, when I'm looking at these appearances, they had to be extra biblical. And when I'm using the term extra biblical, I'm using it in the sense that it's foreign to the New Testament. So we read about a lot of the New Testament appearances in the extra biblical literature as well. Some of them are a retelling of the New Testament appearances verbatim. So I did not include those into my tally sheet, although I did keep record of them because they will come into play later in my research. For my thesis, I just looked at the extra biblical stuff. There was something unique about them that set them apart from the New Testament. And then in addition to that, the appearance had to be clearly a manifestation of Jesus post-crucifixion. And the reason why I lay it out that way, when you're reading down through some of this extra biblical literature, it may talk about Jesus appearing as a bright light or something like that, and it's very vague in context. But what I found is if you really look close, you can determine what's going on. There were some occurrences that appeared to be post-crucifixion appearances of Jesus, but then after a closer examination, it looks like, hey, this is just a retelling of the transfiguration, or something like that, where
Ah,
Jesus emitted light. So you really had to watch your context and what's going on here, so we didn't pull something in that wasn't supposed to be there. But then you had to make sure you weren't eliminating that something that should be there as well. So it did get fairly complicated at times. So yeah, dating, um, extra biblical, and it had to be a manifestation of Jesus post crucifixion to meet the
that's good.
criteria.
I'm glad that you, if some scholars dated it after the year 200, as long as a number of them dated before 200, I'm glad you included those. Be ashamed to just miss out on some of those for your research, just because we want to do a hard stop date of 200. So, in your research, did you find any unique appearances, a post-resurrection appearance of Jesus that's not found in the New Testament?
Oh my goodness. Yes, actually, I found quite a bit. So if I look at the 170-year sample span that I was examining, I read over 150 sources. Again, some of these are complete books; they're massive. And then among all that information, I found over 60 post-crucifixion appearances of Jesus that are unique to those found in the New Testament. Again, some of the appearances
How
are
many?
verbatim New Testament, over 60. Yeah,
Wow.
it's really quite impressive. I was really blown away by what I'd found. I was not expecting to find that much information. And to be honest, when I first started reading, and I'm going through the Apostolic Fathers, I was getting a little discouraged at first because I'm not finding much of anything at all. But when I started hitting the Nag Hammadi library and some of this other information, where I really had to start getting creative on how I found the information, I had to put my seatbelt on because it was escalating quickly. I was getting a lot of information in a short amount of time. So yeah, it was very, very interesting how much I uncovered, or I don't want to say uncovered, how much I found. It's not as though I'm initially finding the information; it's found out there. I'm just compiling it all together in one source at this point, and some
Now,
of it was very difficult to find.
you said about 60 resurrection appearances of Jesus that are not found in the New Testament. You found this literature. Um, were these 60 unique ones? In other words, were they 60 different ones, or were they 20 different appearances, some of them discussed a few times?
Yeah, so it's interesting how they're all laid out. Some of these appearances were unique to the New Testament in the sense that there were some differences between them and the New Testament itself. So, one of the particular instances I'm thinking of here is the women that were witnessing Jesus, after he was crucified, or after he was raised from the dead, or what it claims is a resurrection. The names of the women differ from that in the New Testament. Now, there's not a whole lot of those differences. That's just a minor one. Everything else seems to be verbatim, but then you start getting into things where some of the extra biblical literature seems to be filling in the gaps of the New Testament. And what I mean by that is, in 1 Corinthians 15, we have a reference to Jesus appearing to James. Well, we don't really know the context around that. But in the extra biblical literature, it seems to fill in some of those gaps. I'm not saying it's trustworthy. I'm just saying someone is making an attempt to fill in some of the gaps,
Yeah.
of how Jesus appeared to James, what happened. For instance, there's one where Jesus appears to James because James, he vows not to eat until he witnesses the risen Jesus. Well, Jesus appears to him. They break their fast. They set up kind of a little. It's something very similar to the Last Supper kind of a setting, and they eat. They eat together. There's not a whole lot of other context with it, but it's just kind of filling in, some of the gaps there that you might see. Some other differences that you'll find in extra biblical literature is Jesus often appears in different forms, polymorphous. And what I mean by that is, some people call him a shapeshifter. So a lot of times he'll appear as a small child, as another adult. In one passage, he's being referred to as a ship's captain, where he's commanding a ship, and his crew are angels. But this is being hidden initially but Jesus is appearing to, in this case, he's appearing to Andrew on a ship. It's Jesus in the form of someone else. In the apocryphal Acts, such as the Acts of John, Jesus appears as a small child quite a bit, and there's some other ones where this happens. It happens frequently, him showing up as a small child, which we don't see anything like that in the New Testament whatsoever. And then it's different in the sense that a lot of times Jesus will appear to someone and he will confer some sort of special knowledge or authority on someone. We find this in the Gnostic literature, that kind of stuff. So, we have an account where Jesus appears to, or claims to appear to Mary and is giving her special knowledge. A lot of times Jesus will show up and he'll give special knowledge to some of his disciples on, how one's supposed to be saved. And of course, we don't know what that information is. He's sharing it with them. They don't share it with us, the reader today. But there's quite a bit of unique information there as compared to the New Testament writings. One other one.
Do you remember? Let me just come in with a question before you continue here.
Sure.
Do you recall whether there was an appearance to Simon? When in the Gospel of Luke, once the Emmaus disciples return, they say, "Hey, we just saw him. We met him on the road," and they said, "Yes, it's true. The Lord has appeared to Simon." So, is that narrated? You said there's one narrated. Yeah.
Yeah. Are you speaking about Simon Peter?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm assuming. Yes. Matter of fact, there's texts devoted specifically to his appearances to Peter himself. Some of them, when you read them, I'll be honest here. Some of them don't sound real believable. Okay, but it's interesting to read it and get the take on what some of these people were trying to push early on. And I don't want to say that everyone's trying to push something. If you think about it, a lot of these appearances, the concept of an appearance and the concept of what was going on originated from somewhere. So, there's background information there someplace, and I think some of that stuff is important to look at. What did people believe and why did they believe it? So if we can look at some of the stuff, we can see, okay, well, people back then, they must have believed that Jesus rose from the dead, must have believed that he was appearing post-crucifixion, must have believed that he was performing miracles. It's interesting, some of the stuff that they wrote about, although it may not be believable, the concept originated from somewhere. So it's just interesting.
Something when you said, when you're reading these, some of them just don't sound believable. I can hear some skeptics smirking right now, thinking, well, none of it sounds, not even the ones in the New Testament sound believable to me. What would you say to them?
Yeah, you know what? No, I can understand where they're coming from, but there's a huge difference. If you're going to knock on the New Testament based on some of this other stuff, you need to take time to read it. Mm-hmm. Once you read it, you'll realize there's a huge difference. Mm-hmm. Okay, so if I pose the question, what would you expect to see if the resurrection did take place? Okay, I would expect to see some appearances. I would expect to see some people relaying information concerning those appearances. I might even expect someone to take that information and embellish it a little bit over time. What I wouldn't expect to see are accounts where you have, Simon Magus flying around, Jesus speaking through an infant, just all kinds of stuff. It's just so far-fetched. It's, and it doesn't have any other independent information to support it whatsoever. There's a huge difference between what we read in the New Testament and what we see in the extra biblical literature. And the further you get away in time, the more it changes. The earlier stuff, and I don't want to tip my hand too much because I have some stuff that I'm going to share later on, but the closer you get to the crucifixion date, the more believable some of the stuff sounds. So I'll leave it there. But there, I would challenge someone if they're going to knock the New Testament because I'm saying some of the stuff is not believable. Just pick up the information and read it for yourself. You'll see what I mean. There's a huge difference.
Yeah, it's you take like the Gospel of Peter, which most scholars think was written around the year 150, somewhere around the middle of the 2nd century, and You've got Easter morning, a bunch of people are at the tomb, and the stone rolls itself away, and these two angels come down from heaven, and they go into the tomb, and they come out carrying Jesus on their shoulders, and their heads go up into the sky, and Jesus, not to be outdone, his head goes up above the heads of the angels, and then Jesus' cross follows them out of the tomb, and the voice from heaven says to the cross, "Did you preach to those who sleep?" And the cross answers, "Yes." This is, or the infancy gospel of Thomas, where I think Jesus as a child is working with his father Joseph, the carpenter, and his dad cuts a beam too short, and he's just distraught over this because they're going to lose money because he has to get another beam. And Jesus says, "No problem, Pops." And he goes over and stretches the beam. Or, another case where Jesus is playing by a stream on the Sabbath, and he takes some clay and molds them into some birds, and then he breathes on them or claps, and they become alive and fly away. And interesting enough, that story finds its way into the Quran.
Yes.
So you see, even Bart Ehrman, who is an atheist, has said that in his New Testament intro, that if you want to know about the real Jesus, there is only one place to go. And he says, this is the New Testament Gospels. And he adds, this is not for theological reasons, like this is what we believe, not what these others. It is for historical reasons, pure and simple. And that's a virtual quote from what he said. So I think you're right. Even though a skeptic may say none of the resurrection appearances seem credible to them, seem believable, you're right. There is a real difference between what we read in the Gospels and what we read in this extra biblical literature.
Yeah. It's as you get further away from the crucifixion, the odder it gets. It really, really does. Even like what you said with the Gospel of Peter and the cross coming out of the tomb. I mean, it's just fantastic. I don't think anybody believes that actually happened. But there are some accounts that I'm going to kind of keep under wraps for now, where there might be something there. But I'm going to keep those to myself right now.
You see a few. You're not going to mention these because you're going to be looking into this further in your doctoral research. But you're saying your preliminary research, you think that there may be a few of these appearance traditions in the non-canonical literature of the resurrection appearance of Jesus that may be an authentic appearance?
Well, I will put it to you this way. I'm thinking there might be a couple elements that are added in. I'm not saying that the whole appearance thing is legitimate. I'm just saying there might be a couple elements to some of them that might add additional information. I'm still looking into it, so I don't want to really go on the record as saying in a hard stance, hey, here's something. I'm just saying that there's information there. It's like, okay, I could see where someone might gather a little more understanding from that, or that might fill in a gap that the New Testament leaves open. I mean, because let's face it, the New Testament did not record everything that ever happened.
Right.
So even John says that he couldn't hold that much information. So there's still stuff out there. It's just I'm still looking at a couple things. So
and even some conservative scholars, New Testament scholars, think that the Gospel of Thomas, even though they think that it is written after the New Testament literature, and most scholars today think Gospel of Thomas is probably dated to around the year 150. Some date it earlier, some date it later, but most scholars around 150. They think the Gospel of Thomas may include 2 or 3 sayings of Jesus, teachings of Jesus, that are authentic and that are not found in the New Testament. So yeah, that's cool. I'm going to be excited about reading your dissertation, man. So you have a rating system when it comes to these different resurrection appearances of Jesus in the non-canonical literature. Can you tell us something about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So as I'm going down through and I'm reading all these appearances, I'm realizing these things differ in a lot of ways, but I'm starting to realize patterns on a lot of it as well. So what I did was I proposed a categorical rating system, 1 through 5, as far as classifying these appearances. So when I look at a category 1, that would include anything that's physical or a bodily manifestation of Jesus post crucifixion. And an example of that in the New Testament would be, where Jesus shows up and he invites Thomas, hey, come over here and touch my side and my hands. He's actually there. He's eating food in another account, that he's easily recognized. No one's questioning that he's a ghost or he's, something, a manifestation, just a spiritual manifestation. He's actually there. And so some of the criteria for fitting into a category 1 that I propose is you must be able to detect him with one of your bodily senses, more specifically sight, sound. I suppose you could throw the other ones in there if you thought about it hard enough. But, are you seeing him in the sense that light is reflecting off of him and going into your eye, and your understanding that you are looking at material being in front of you? Are you hearing him in the sense that sound waves are being produced and they're going into your ear and hitting your eardrum? So physical in that sense.
In space time,
Now,
appearing in space time, I
yes,
guess you'd say, right?
yes, exactly. So that would be a
As opposed
category
to a
1.
vision or, yeah, some kind of a heavenly
Yes,
vision or something. Okay.
yeah, yeah. And matter of fact, that's a good segue into the next one. Category 2 is a vision or a dream manifestation, and so what would constitute that is um, that's going to be more metaphysical than physical. You're in a state of inhibited consciousness. Somehow you're sleeping or you're in a trance, but Jesus is intentionally communicating with you in a way that's not normal. It's metaphysical in some sense. And there's quite a few of those. We even see some of those in the New Testament. Where you know Jesus appears to Paul. It says in a vision when he's in prison. So that concept is not completely foreign to the New Testament. And then we get into a very interesting one. It's a category 3, which is a bodily metamorphosis, or it's a polymorphous appearance. And these are the ones that I was mentioning where Jesus appears as someone uh, in a form other than his own. Okay, but it's clearly understood that it is Jesus appearing. And so, like I mentioned earlier, Jesus appears as a child quite a bit in some of the apocryphal Acts. He appears as a human adult in several places. So when you look at these, Jesus is shape shifting or doing something of that nature, but it's clearly him from the context. You can't avoid that. And what's strange, if you think about it, we have something like that in the New Testament. When the travelers, going to Emmaus, are approached by Jesus, they don't recognize him. And if you read the account, it looks like it's a metaphysical intent that they don't recognize him. So, what's going on there exactly? I'm not sure. But
Well, it does
Jesus
say,
is,
Luke does say that their eyes were kept from recognizing him.
yeah,
So it does seem like he at least appeared like a normal human. They thought he was just a normal human traveler, right? They just didn't recognize who he was.
yes, exactly. Yeah. So initially, he would fall into a category 1 appearance there because he's physical, but there's an extra element to it. He's not recognized as Jesus until later on when whatever metaphysical activity keeping them from understanding his true identity is lifted, and then they can see it's him. And then, if I remember correctly, he disappeared from them.
Yeah. Now,
So
some people might want to put the appearance, Jesus' appearance to Mary at the empty tomb, because she doesn't seem to recognize him at first, right? But I don't know that I would put him in that category there. It's the same as the Emmaus disciples, because, I've been to Jerusalem twice. I've been at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre twice. And, there's other tombs right around there that are still there. And I've been inside one of those tombs. You can crawl inside of it. And when you're inside, you can't see the person's you can go up to maybe the waist, looking out, because you're inside that tomb, you're looking out, you can only see up to the waist. So she hears Jesus talking outside, but she can't see his face. So, that's why maybe she could be confusing him at that point. She can't see who he is. And maybe he was wearing a hoodie, So,
yeah.
but,
and I mean, in
but yeah,
addition, I mean, yeah, if you look at her too, she was distraught. I mean, she'd come there if she truly wasn't expecting to see Jesus risen from the dead. I mean, if you lose a loved one and then someone behind you starts talking to you, and you glance back at him, I mean, that's the last person you're going to expect to see, honestly. So I think it's a real life kind of scenario playing out there, where she
yeah.
didn't, recognize him.
Okay, so you would put the Emmaus disciples in category 1, but there is the difference. They can't recognize him. But that's not what you're talking about, like with category 3. He, like you said, he's something else, like a child. It's like God appearing to Moses in the burning bush, right? Something like that. It's a different form.
Yeah, a category 3 is always a category 1, but it has that additional element to it. You just can't recognize it. I mean, you can reach out and grab. If Jesus shows up and he's, appearing as a child, you can touch the child. You can, do everything you could with a normal person. But then, it's revealed that, hey, this is in fact Jesus, and and it's clear in the writings.
So the Emmaus disciples, the appearance to the Emmaus disciples, even though it's biblical literature, and your studies with the extra biblical literature, you would put the Emmaus disciples in category 3 then, right?
Yeah, I personally would. Yeah, so my current rating system, and I will say this as well. As I continue to research and look at things, my rating system here is I'm starting to tweak it a little bit. So these initial 5 categories, I am modifying them as we speak.
Okay.
So they are changing a little bit as I learn more and learn more about what constitutes a physical reality in front of you and whatnot. So as far as the thesis goes, I think it put everything into 5 nice categories that makes sense, but I think we can do better with them. But for right now, yes, the Emmaus disciples, I would put those in a category 3 because Jesus is appearing as someone other than his known form, and it appears to be intentional. It's not like he was just not recognized. Something had to be lifted for them to be able to recognize who he was.
That's cool. And I would expect there to be some tweaks between, completing a thesis and completing a doctoral dissertation. So, that's cool.
Yeah. So, moving on, a category 4 is an audible voice of Jesus only. Now, this kind of crosses over from my category 1 criteria in the sense that you're actually hearing something, but you just don't have all the bodily stimulus coming with it. So you can't see him, but you can hear him. So to be honest, I'm still working on how this plays out, because in some of this extra biblical literature, Jesus speaks from the heavens to people, and they hear him. A specific person will hear him, but then people around that person will hear him as well. So what's going on here? Is this something where Jesus is just putting information into their minds, or are there sound waves being emitted that's going in and stimulating their eardrums? I'm not sure what's going on there yet. I'm still working on that. Don't know that I'll ever have an answer, but it's interesting because it does set it apart from a category 1. But there does seem to be something physical going on because multiple people can hear Jesus speaking from the heavens.
Are there cases where people can say there's a bunch of people around and some people can hear him, but others can't?
Yeah, that's interesting.
Kind of like Kazoo on the Flintstones. Fred and Barney and Dino can see and hear Kazoo, but Betty and Wilma can't.
Right. I would have to think about that one, to be honest. Nothing pops into mind right now. Now, I do know that there are cases where Jesus is recorded as speaking to John, and he heard him, but then Jesus reaffirmed a message to a crowd. So I guess I'd have to go back and look at the context. Was John standing next to the crowd when this happened, or was he away from them? And then later on, Jesus just affirmed the message he gave to John earlier when he was away from it. So I think I'd have to look at context on a few of these a little closer to be able to judge that.
When you're talking about people can hear Jesus, but not see him, they just hear his audible voice. Maybe you can call those manifestations of the resurrected Jesus, but you wouldn't call them appearances, because it seems to me an appearance implies vision.
Yeah, yes, and that's true, and it's something that needs to be taken into consideration as well. What constitutes a an appearance? It's you know, at the end of my paper, I did not include it in my findings. I just mentioned it is something that was kind of unique. There's
Yes.
writing having to do with the letter of Christ and King Abgar, and in this writing, um, you know apparently there's some sort of an illness, and it's being requested that Jesus come and heal this king. Well, Jesus says, apparently Jesus has a lot on his plate, and he'll come after his resurrection, or I don't remember all the exact details. But later on, he supposedly sends one of his disciples to heal the king, and then Edessa is converted to Christianity. Well, does that constitute an appearance? A letter back and forth? Somebody, he didn't appear, but it wrote. But if you wrote a letter, wouldn't that imply that someone wrote it and must be alive? So, I mean, I'm not saying that this fits into it. It's just these kind of things you need to take into consideration. I mean, we're really dealing with some unique things here, talking about Jesus appearing later on, because it's not always clear cut as I think we would like it to be in the New Testament. I mean, everybody just thinks he walked out of the tomb, physically walked down the street, appeared to everybody, and then eventually ascended into heaven. It's not always that clean cut. I mean, the Emmaus disciples witnessed him in what I consider category 3 appearance. You have Jesus appearing in. It looks like it's heavily implied that he appears in a locked room. How's that thing work out? So, I mean, there's some things that Jesus was doing after his crucifixion that he didn't seem to be doing before his crucifixion.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so there's some things that need to be considered there for sure.
That appearance, the letter to King Abgar that you mentioned, that's reported by Eusebius, and Eusebius seems to take it seriously, but as far as I know, no scholars today do. And so, we have to be careful about, we can, I think the early church fathers provide us with some good information. Some is more reliable than others, but they are by no means unimpeachable or perfect. They were gullible in some ways, as we see Eusebius was, and he's the first. You could call him the first church historian.
Right. I would agree wholeheartedly. I mean, as I'm talking about these things, we need to keep in mind that just because a writing has the name of Jesus on it doesn't mean that it should be trusted.
Yeah.
So we need to keep that in consideration.
So that's 4 categories. What's category number 5?
Okay, so category 5 is what I leave for the undetermined or the unknown. And this is where the context of a passage is so vague that you really can't place the appearance in one of the other categories. And what I'm talking about here is what comes to mind. There's Andrew at one point, and he's recalling a message that Jesus gave him. And from the context, it appears that this is a post-crucifixion message that Jesus relayed to Andrew. But it does not give the setting in which he received the information or anything like that. It just, says that, hey, Jesus, give me this information. We don't know how, when, where. We just know that it was post-crucifixion, and that's all we're given. And there are some other instances where the circumstances are so odd, it's just hard to place it, or there's just so little information there that you can't really tell what's going on. And there's a few of those peppered throughout, but there's not a whole lot of them. Most of them we can at least make some sense of what's going on, who Jesus was with, and the surrounding circumstances. So category 5 is undetermined. Those are for the ones where we can't really, figure it out one way or another.
Okay. So I guess final question here. I alluded to this a little earlier, and you don't feel like you've got to give away anything, but of these extra biblical appearances or reports of appearances of the risen Jesus to others, do you think that any of them carry any weight in terms of being legitimate historical recollections?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, there's a couple things that I'm chewing on a little bit. I need to do some more research, see if I can find any scholars that address any of this to give me better understanding of what's going on. There's some things out there that might have an element to them. And again, like I said earlier, I'm not saying that the whole appearance is a literal account, but some of the information that's shared with it seems to fill in some gaps in the Gospels. Is very interesting. It's almost as though, hey, where did this information come from? How'd you come to obtain this? And could this be information to help us learn more about what happened in the New Testament? So, I'm just going to have to plead ignorance on that one right now because I don't know. There's some things that are really, it's got my gears turning. I'll put it that way. But in the end, what we can draw away from all this is, we can see that people were writing, talking about, sharing information about Jesus a lot, and this is outside the New Testament writings. I had no clue this was so massive until I started reading it for myself. For the naysayers that say that Jesus never existed, oh my goodness, there's so much information here discussing that. I'm not saying it's all legit, but they have this understanding from somewhere, and a lot of this stuff is reported within the lifetimes of people that knew him personally. So, I don't think people were just making this stuff up completely. I think people actually believed that Jesus existed. He was, doing some of these things, performing miracles. And, there's some things where it talks about him being worshiped and all this stuff. I believe this was common play. So I think it's worth investigating and looking at and see if we can draw any more out of it. If nothing else, we can at least understand what people believed and why they believed it, and how we got to this point where we're getting these writings. So,
well, that's exciting, Chris. It's great work you're doing, brother, and I'm really looking forward to you completing your doctoral research and publishing it. I think is going to make a really nice contribution to the world of scholarship on the resurrection of Jesus.
Yeah, it's as I told you when we initially started talking about my thesis work. I really wasn't worried about how long it took. I just wanted to make an impact for the kingdom. I want to make an impact on resurrection research. And I think this opens up some opportunities. I really do, because if I can pull this information together and compile it into one source, maybe I'm not going to figure everything out, with the information that I pulled together, but it's in a place in which someone can access it and get to it without spending all that time and research, and then maybe they can make headway that I'll never be able to achieve. So in that sense alone, I'm just thankful for the opportunity to be able to contribute.
Well, I'm glad you are, brother. And I'm kind of selfishly wanting to see your work when you're done, because I've got a question that you and I have discussed that I'd like to have resolved, and I know that I'll probably be able to get an answer to that question through your research. So yeah, this is good. So, but you're not in a PhD program yet, right?
Yeah, I'm in the process of working through it. I've got my introductory essays done and all that stuff. I've been in contact with the university and whatnot. So yeah, and then there's other prerequisites I needed to accomplish. I'm learning Greek and stuff like that. So I'm in the process of getting all this stuff done so I can get it moving. But as you mentioned earlier, I do have a lot of time invested in this already. So there's a ton of information that's already applied to the end game here.
Well, great. Well, Chris, thanks for sharing about your research today. I'm sure a number of our viewers are really going to enjoy this and find it fascinating. And of course, we are very much looking forward to you completing your doctoral work and being able to give us, more exhaustive conclusions on what you find.
Sure. Again, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.